Good afternoon. My name is David Hockett. Being the last person has its pros and cons. It's a little nerve-wracking. You feel like you have to end on a high note, have to be interesting, like change everyone's mind today. But also, I think it's a pro because I got to listen to every other presenter and get to kind of know my audience here. My humanities subject, I guess, is concerned in a literary analysis. It is emblematic language style and how it represents the characters in Funes the Memorious, which is a short story written by Jorge Luis Borges. Let me give you a little bit of background and explain what I'm trying to do here. Jorge Luis Borges was born in 1899 and lived to 1986. He's an Argentine writer and focused mainly on surrealist fiction in the form of short stories. The story that I wanted to analyze today was Funes the Memorious, and to give a little bit of a summary, it was written in kind of an epistolesque style, in a letter form, written by the undisclosed narrator to another party concerning the recently deceased Uruguayan genius. The narrator wishes to share his testimonial to be added to the other testimonials of Ireneo Funes, a savant boy who possesses the extraordinary capabilities of being able to perceive all things with perfect precision and to remember all things with an infallible memory. To interject a little bit, he got this power from being thrown off a horse, which is, it's kind of a strange theme to get to remember everything and never forget this superpower from an accident, which is kind of the theme of most superheroes now. But at the same time, he's left paralyzed. He cannot move. He also lacks an understanding for human abstractions, general ideas, emotions. It's more about the details. And this is the kind of contradictory nature of Funes that we're going to analyze and how the language copies that. To the narrator, Funes is merely an acquaintance. He's only been met about 3 times, but those few encounters he did have were so memorable as to impress on him very deeply his feelings about the incomprehensible character of Funes, and he attempts to cite those few extraordinary meanings with him in this short story. My analysis, or my argument for this, is that the story's stylistic elements, such as word choice, exposition, and symbolism, represent and parallel the contradictory nature of Funes' character and also the narrator's feelings of inferiority in comparison to him. Word choice. So, when starting this story, I'd say it's a denser read, especially for a novice reader like myself. But after looking these up, all these terms, it's just kind of, what was my feeling? The words were elaborate. They were of substantial size, and they required you to, not required, but I stopped frequently, and this is a sin in critical reading. I'm sorry, English teachers. Stop and look up the word at the same time as you're reading it. You should actually flow through and just mark it for later. But taciturn, sibilants, diberems, I don't know if any of you have heard or seen these words before, probably, but I didn't, and I didn't know how to pronounce them. But after learning their definitions, like taciturn is reserved, or uncommunicated in speech, saying little. Sibilants, making it characterized by hissing sound. Dithyramb, which means Greek chorus, a very passionate one, but in this case, a passionate or inflated speech, poem, or other writing. When readers are confronted with words like these that occur throughout the short story, it kind of creates this frustration, almost, or maybe confusion, that can kind of parallels the frustration or inferiority felt by the narrator in comparison to the extraordinary Funes. He constantly uses big words like to show himself, I'm still smart, even though I feel really dumb compared to Funes. And he wants to show that through the verbose language. The next part of language that mirrors or mimics Funes' character is the juxtaposition of words. Words like uneasy magic, rustic Zarathustra, morose delight. These words don't usually go together, but in this case, they work for Funes. Why? To give an example, in the book, or in the short story, the narrator goes to visit Funes. It's like his second time. He's now a scholar of Latin, and he's learning the Latin language. And Funes sends him a letter and says, I heard you were in town, and I want to borrow your books. I can learn the books, and I can read them. I can understand them in one day. And the narrator is like, one day? I've been studying this hard language for a couple of years, and you think you can do it one day? No way. I will disillusion you fully and send you the hardest Latin books. But lo and behold, after sending them and visiting them next evening, Funes has already learned them all. And he has learned how to speak it. And it describes perfectly the morose delight, the strange satisfaction that Ireneo Funes derives from citing Roman text in the dark and learning the Latin language in a single day. And we're returning to the story. After reciting the reason for needing the books back so he could return to Argentina, Funes stops to chat with him and expound all his inexplicable theories and viewpoints of the world. And he does, though, for the entire night till dawn. He told, one of the things he told the narrator is that I alone have more memories than all mankind and has possibly had since the world has been the world. My dreams are like your people's waking hours. My memory, sir, is like a garbage heap. To try to explain, the narrator tries to explain his power by saying that for regular people, it's easy to grasp shapes on a chalkboard, a triangle or a rectangle. But for Funes, he could fully intuitively grasp the stormy mane of a pony on a wet day next to the herds of cattle as they roamed across the town of Fray Bentos, which is where they live. And in this kind of a night-long discussion with Funes that makes it feel like Funes is a whole nother world unto himself, which kind of goes into my next. The words are as symbols themselves. Commenting on Funes, he says that Funes was like a lucid spectator of the world, of the multiform, instantaneous, and intolerably precise world. And those words are so large, they're like worlds unto themselves. But yet, as grand as they are still insufficient when describing all that there is in the world and all that there is in Funes' mind. After word choice, the next element that kind of mimics these characters and their themes is exposition, or the telling and commentary of the story. I'd like to read the first paragraph that one reads in this story, and it kind of is telling of like a stream of consciousness, the way it's written. It's got a lot of endless clauses, and it's got a jarring parenthetical phrase. Quote, I remember him. I have no right to utter this sacred word. Only one man on earth had the right, and he's dead, with a dark passion flower in his hand, seeing it as no one has ever seen it, though he might look it from twilight of dawn to that of evening, a whole lifetime. This kind of sentence caused me to read back a bunch of times. It's one that's not understood till you read the whole short story and go back again. But it's just that kind of stopping to make you wonder, in awe and amazement, that kind of shows the kind of person Funes is, that makes you stop in awe. I'm like, this almost doesn't make sense, but after reading it more, you understand. The last element I'd like to talk about is the symbolism in general. To give one more example from the story, in their night-long discussion, Funes expounds his theories about language and memory. And he says that, in his own words, that the world is too general. There needs to be specific ways to identify everything. And for him, he made a seemingly insane project of making an infinite vocabulary to describe the natural series of numbers. As in, he found the number 365 to have too many symbols and too many names, that he didn't understand the concept that the 3 was for 300s, the 6 was for 6 tens, and the 5 for 5 ones. Rather, give just the number a name. Say, give the name 365 the name railroad. Give the number 9 the name Cynthia. It didn't matter because he could memorize all the names, and so it made perfect sense to him. So this symbolism that I want to talk about here is that it seems like a lot of intelligence, but it's still unintelligible to everyone else. And it goes with the theme of light and darkness. This whole night-long discussion is done in the darkness because Funes doesn't see any need to light a candle. He can perceive all the things he saw in the day and review them later. And it's kind of a weird contrast because later in the morning it's finally revealed. He sees his face, and it's just a 19-year-old boy. Regardless of this, the narrator bestows upon him the very poetic description as seeming as monumental as bronze, more ancient than Egypt, older than the prophecies of the pyramids. And it's a strange symbolic contrast that such intelligence of observation should come out of the darkness, since intelligence is often symbolized by light. The narrator, even though he gives him this homage of being great, he still recognizes at the same time that Funes is kind of disturbing to him, that his theories were more Madland-like, and he couldn't and that for him, he was nervous that everything, all his movements about him, would persist in Funes' memory and never be forgotten. Again, it's the symbolism mirroring Funes is an emblem for him and for the themes of this story. The last example I'd like to show is the symbolism of captivity. When the narrator returns to Fray Bentos, this is after Funes has been thrown off the horse, is paralyzed, and receives his new power. The symbolism of captivity comes. Funes, when asked, Funes says to him that he considers the blow beneficial because before he thought he couldn't remember everything, and now that he can see everything and remember everything, he considers every other human blind, deaf, addle-brained, and unable to comprehend anything. But as the narrator states, that twice he saw him, Funes, just sitting at the window behind the iron grating, harshly emphasized his condition as a perpetual prisoner, once motionless, with his eyes closed, another time, again motionless, absorbed in the contemplation of a fragrant sprig of Santonica. This scene of Funes staring out the window, looking at a plant, is not only a symbol of him being a captive of his own body, but also of his own mind. So fixated on something, so deep in contemplation, he could never participate in the world around him. He was socially ostracized, isolated from the rest of the people who were indifferent to his condition. This symbolic paradox begs the question of whether great mental ability is worth having if it cannot be shared or understood by others. So it is these three elements of the style of language that helped impress upon us of Funes' character. The exposition, the diction, the symbolism were all utilized as emblems for the paradox of Funes' character and for the mixed feelings that the narrator had for Funes. It's this kind of, when I read this story, this very rich story that's full of diverse language and language that itself reinforces the messages and the characters, that displays the relation, that kind of unlock language and meaning. The skilled use of literary devices display the relationship between the two main themes of story, language and memory. Language solidifies and articulates memory, and memory gives meaning to language. Why I think it matters, though, that Borges was able to do this, it reveals how literature and an understanding of these devices can be a gateway for examining the complexities of human nature and psychology. It's a very subtle way of bringing to our attention human characteristics and motives that we all know and recognize on a subconscious level, but are rarely able to articulate. Fiction may be fictional, but it can very much contain anthropological truths about us humans. Thank you. Any questions?
So what is, would you say, the main theme or two that, while reading this and going really into the analysis of the text, really helped shape your view of the world that you had prior to?
I think the biggest change was the relationships between language and memory. It seemed constantly like, we do have a hard time remembering things, and we're always trying to create devices to not forget. Mnemonic devices. We're trying to be more interesting. We're trying to use more visual aids in the world so that we don't forget what we hear, so we can use it later. But I love the theme of how language seems to have its deficiencies in explaining a thing so it can be memorized, or that it would have an impression on us that would last. But what this story, through its style, found that there are ways that an understanding of literary devices, such as a style or the word choice, poetic things like repetition, the way it's organized, they make it so whatever you're speaking about can be internalized on a subconscious level. And that's what was kind of interesting to me, and that's what I thought about when applying it to other studies, to the sciences, to math, to any other discipline. Mm-hmm. That is the thing. He's trying to make it. By trying to make it stay the same. By not being general at all, not having general ideas. He wanted everything to have a definition, have its own word. Every memory in his mind had to have a definition. It bothered him when a dog seen from the side had the same name as a dog seen from the front. Kind of strange, right? But I guess there's an application to that today, how we kind of lose each other when our meanings, we have a different perception of what a word means. It's so dynamic. For me, when I was thinking about classical liberalism and modern liberalism, I was trying to think, well, is my definition different from his? And I was trying to think of that in all the different topics. Like, is my definition is different from his? Is there a way we can somehow link them? Bring them together? But that seems like it would lock language into a space. I don't know. Maybe all definitions should be exact. Not misused. At least that's my idea. Flowers for Elder. I haven't read that one yet. I am writing it. Who is it by? Flowers of Elder. That's good enough. But thank you.